All right, welcome everyone to the Monday, April 25th meeting of the Government Operations Committee. We're going to start off with approval of the minutes from our March 21st meeting.
So moved.
I'll second.
All right, all in favor say aye.
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 All right, thank you very much. And then today we're going to be continuing our conversation on the extension of the Parklet program. We have really incredible public input on the program that we'll review today and sort of look at a draft ordinance with some revisions from our last meeting. So I'll hand it over to Assistant Manager Josh Edwards.
Thanks, Chair Parker. It's good to be here and good to be in person with everybody. Appreciate staff being here. One thing we wanted to start with, we're going to first hear from the Attorney's Office. They shared a memo with the GOC a few weeks ago about some of their thoughts related to parklets. Then we're going to talk about the survey results, and our interim Central Services Director, Gavin's going to lead us through that, and then we'll dive into the changes that we provided y'all related to the ordinance. So we hope the first hour we'll be able to finish all the parklet conversation and spend the last 30 minutes talking about animal services. So with that, Austin, did you want to?
Absolutely. For those of y'all that don't know me, my name is Austin Jackson. I think I know a lot of y'all, but it's in-person meeting, so it's good to see everyone in person. And so I know we have a lot to discuss. I'll be very brief. I'm happy to answer any specific questions about the memo that was sent out last month. But essentially, the memo outlines in some detail a number of concerns that the Attorney's Office has identified as we've been involved in this process of making the pilot permanent. The pilot program more permanent. And some of these concerns were old, I would say. A lot of these, at least two of these, specifically sections 3 and 4 pertaining to the selection process and the service of alcohol in parklets. Those concerns date back to even when my predecessor, Michael Petty, was involved with the inception of the pilot program. And some of these other ones, that are outlined in the memo, specifically the ADA compliance and the concerns related to operating a parklet next to bike lanes, I would say those sort of evolved as the Attorney's Office has been involved in the process. So just very briefly, section 1, we talk about the ADA compliance aspect of parklets. This was discussed in some detail of the February GOC meeting, but essentially, as restaurants with public accommodations, they are required to be compliant with the American Disabilities Act, which would mean that parklets themselves have to be ADA accessible for persons with disabilities. We definitely want to make sure that we're not, that ACC is not put in the position of being accused of denying persons with disabilities the opportunity to participate in the program. And certainly appreciate that the staff has made some revisions to the parklet ordinance, specifically sections 622-8, sections D and E. I think that there's a great bit of detail in there that sort of is intended to address these concerns and reduce the county's liability in terms of making the parklets ADA compliant. Section 2 goes into the discussion about the concerns about operating parklets near bike lanes. And while I would certainly stand on the contents of the memo, because I think it goes into a great bit of detail, generally, I would just say we're concerned with allowing parklets to operate next to busy bike lanes. And that would essentially require both the patrons of the parklets and restaurant staff to frequently cross the bike lane when they're entering the parklet, serving food and beverages, things of that nature. And so we definitely want to be considerate of that, particularly as the Attorney's Office has made at least one allegation where an individual was injured in a bike lane next to a parklet, and they have at least threatened litigation. We have not received any formal legal actions, but that is something that I want to make the GOC aware of as we're making the parklet permanent.
And in the document that Gavin sent you all in advance of the updates, you'll see there's gray shaded in the bike lane allowances as well that TTW has helped us rethink and make changes. So we'll talk about those later.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. That would be in section 622-8, section G. So similar announcement to the revisions that have been implemented to address the ADA compliance concerns. I appreciate staff's efforts in incorporating those revisions as well. Section 3 talks about the importance of having an equitable selection process, because as a government body, we have to make sure that our actions are consistent with the equal protection clause of the United States Constitution, and making sure that the government is awarding parking licenses in an equitable manner, making sure we're not treating two similarly situated businesses differently, unless we can articulate a rational basis for doing so. Lastly, I think this is probably the concern that's been discussed the most over the course of this process, and that is allowing the service of alcohol in these parklets. As explained in the memo, there are sort of a number of two laws at issue, really, our local ordinance and state regulations that come from the Department of Revenue that we have no control over. And the concern is that the Department of Revenue regulations will essentially prohibit staff from being able to serve alcohol in the parklets. And so the only workaround that we've been able to identify is to allow the patrons themselves to transport the alcohol. And as I explained in the memo, there are obviously some concerns with allowing potentially inebriated patrons to do that, as well as potentially causing some issues with enforcement of the ordinance. I'm sure we'll talk about that later. But then again, I do appreciate that there are some revisions in section 622-10 that seem to are intended to address this concern. I'm happy to answer any specific questions, but I think that kind of summarizes the attorney's office position and the concerns with that area.
Any questions at this time from commissioners?
Just one. So the Department of Revenue regulates alcohol staff from serving alcohol in the parklet, but the patrons can you go back over that? What some of the concerns that you have from the patrons leaving the staff and going to the parklet?
And so there's a strict Department of Revenue regulation that says that alcohol license holders, so in this case, the restaurants, they're prohibited from serving alcohol in areas that are not exclusively leased, owned, and exclusively controlled by the establishment. And because parklets would be erected in public parking spaces, that obviously would not qualify as part of the licensed premises. And so because of this the Department of Revenue regulation, staff, while they certainly could serve alcohol, they would be jeopardizing their alcohol license if they did that. And we certainly don't want to implicitly encourage the businesses to do that. So by default, the only party left to transport the alcohol would be the patron of the park.
I had 3 quick questions that may be addressed as we go through the revisions in the ordinance, but I just wanted to check before we got there in case they aren't. My first question pertains to the bike lanes. How many business units that are operating in the current parklet program may be subject to this concern? The only one I can think of is the national. It's just the national? Okay. That being said, then, to then connect that to the other issue of making sure we have equitable treatment in our application process, if we were to limit the ordinance to areas where that concern is null, areas where they don't have an interaction between any geographic interaction between a parklet and a bike lane, might that sort of address that concern entirely? It may be addressed otherwise in the draft ordinance, but I just wanted to throw out that thought.
And so I think the analysis there would hinge on whether the county, so if the county did that, and we articulate a rational basis for doing so.
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, I think it would be basically rooted in those safety concerns.
Yeah.
Not only the pedestrians, but also the bicyclists.
Okay.
Does that kind of answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
It would make the ordinance less complex too. If you just said we're not going to allow parklets where there's interaction.
Yeah. I mean, it's a bummer for the national, but we got to keep people safe. So that might be something to consider pursuing. Second question, could businesses agree to accept liability? I mean, I guess, again, if we revise the ordinance such that there's not any interaction with the bike lanes, perhaps that then also answers that question as to whether someone could hold ACC Gov liable for an injury sustained passing through that area.
Because it's right away, I don't think we could do that.
Okay.
I can't think of a way to make that happen. I'm happy to research that for us.
Yeah, my first question should answer that. And then this might be a question for police officers in attendance. If there's been any like existing issues with inebriated people carrying beverages in and out, or creating problems with the parklet ordinance, given some less well behaved actions.
Or less than what normally happens.
No, yeah, so similar to kind of the regular old. Okay. So that's helpful for context. Health concern.
But without being said, those departments aren't good.
That's true. Yeah, that's true.
So when we're usually dealing with the downtown shenanigans, there's not anybody.
Okay. That's all I got. Commissioner Link, Denson, anything?
I'm good. I appreciate the discussion, and I read over the brief, and it was really good.
Yes, thank you, Attorney Jackson. It was very good. Okay.
All right, if y'all are ready, we're going to go to the survey results. So again, I can't thank our staff enough. We've had some really good surveys as of late. We've had good responses, but I can't think of any that have gotten this many responses. So I do want to just thank PIO, GIO, and Central Services. Angel was out, I was out getting coffee one day, and Angel was out handing out flyers. She was hitting the pavement. So just really appreciate everybody's help on this effort. With that, Gavin, our interim Central Services Director, is going to lead us through very high level the survey results.
Thank you, Manager Edwards. So y'all were given this ahead of time, and I won't go through the countless pages of comments, but just sort of hit on each one of the main questions. Cynthia, if you wouldn't mind going to the first one, just how familiar are you with parklets? And as you can see from the result, the majority, they are clearly familiar. And I do want to emphasize, I should have done this up front, for 1 week in which this parklet survey was open, we received 651 responses in 7 days. And included in that was 200 written comments for the general question at the end. So as Manager Edwards explained, it was quite impressive. But so general first question, everybody's pretty familiar with parklets. Going to question number 2, the majority would like to see the program continued past the emergency order. Going on to question number 3, as far as the concerns over parking and the loss of parking, I know about a month or 2 ago at the last meeting, the committee had concerns about our parking decks as well as availability for any spaces that we take up on the street. Will they be allowed or made up in quantity in our parking decks? The answer to that question is possibly. With the information that you were sent, a lot of our parking decks are already pre-leased to long-term tenants. There is certainly some availability in each one of the parking decks, but perhaps not to the quantity that you may have thought it would be. Right now, with the number of parklets we have taking up parking spaces, I mean, it's manageable when you look at the actual number of spaces that are taken up versus what's available in the deck. But depending on how the program goes, that could certainly sway back and forth. But for now, as far as the survey results, there was not really a concern over the loss of parking. Going on to question 4, and you'll see this in the current text of the draft ordinance, we did leave in the option for unamplified music, and that was a result of the survey as well, that most respondents did not have an issue with unamplified music being played. Number 5, we asked about the fees that should be assessed for taking up parking spaces and having a parklet, and the majority of the respondents did indicate that they would prefer the significantly discounted fee assessment if we were to go with that program. Yes.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Okay.
Question number 5. Yes, I'm sorry.
Okay, so this is where I got confused. So when we were talking about fees, was this addressed to people in the public, like the patron, or was this just to the business owner? Because the business owner gonna be the one gonna be paying the fees, correct?
So we didn't send one survey versus the other to just citizenry versus business owners. They all got the same survey, but we did send this out by the Downtown Development Authority, walking the streets and handing out flyers, and then just the general survey online available to anyone who wanted to comment on it. But they all received the same surveys.
Okay.
One observation I made that is if you add up the number of people that opted for either full value or partial value, it is greater than those that desired a significant discount. So it struck me that perhaps doing just a partial discount would be a good compromise of, in between those two kind of poles. But I welcome other thoughts on that from my fellow commissioners or staff.
I mean, I would tend to agree from a staff standpoint. We'll certainly go forward with whatever you choose, but when we're looking at it from a loss of parking revenue, it was made clear by the committee that we're not going to capture the full amount, and that's understood. But I think the significant discount starts to tip the scale a little bit on the recovery of some of the staff time, administration, and that loss of parking that we would experience. So. Moving on to question number 6. And again, this is addressed in the draft. We made some changes to this, but the last time we talked specifically regarding the alcohol consumption, there was the idea of striping the walkway from the business to the parklet to indicate clearly that this is the pathway that a patron should choose if they're going from one business to that business's parklet with an alcoholic beverage. Not only would that help the consumer, it would also help our police in identifying someone who may or may not be just walking the street with an open container. So that question was posed, and you see the result there that they either didn't think it was necessary or they didn't have a problem with it. What we did, though, is an alternative in the actual draft. We sort of took out the language about striping the sidewalk, and we came up with an alternative that I'll give full credit to the police department on. And I think it's a good middle ground, but we can go over that once we get to the draft. For question number 7, most of the respondents tended to either visit downtown or work downtown. And depending on how you answered that question, there was a follow-up with number 8 that indicated what type of establishment you worked at, which overwhelmingly was either restaurant or retail.
So Gavin, quick question in relation to Commissioner Davenport's question. Who do you cross-tab, in terms of the types of businesses that those survey takers represented, what they shared related to the fees?
I could look into that. I'll speak with the GIO on that, but I'm not sure if it was set up to where we can pull that data.
Because potentially you've got a sense of what folks were representing what businesses, and you could just look at what they shared about fees to see if there's a market difference.
Sure. We can research that. Okay, and then the final question. Again, this was sort of based on a qualifier of how you answered it. If you happen to own an establishment downtown, the answer to number 9 indicated that most had a parklet and wanted to obviously keep the parklet that they had. And then follow up that last question, number 10, was just the general question of anyone who wanted to share any comments, sort of unrestricted. And our GIO office went through all 200 of the responses and sort of categorized them for us in some of those early bullet points that you saw in the overall document. So.
Okay. I had a quick question just for clarity. So for question 9, the percentages that are laid out in the table are percentages of the total number of respondents to the survey and not percentages of business or Yeah, I guess I'm just confused by, the percentages represented in the table as compared to what's sort of laying out, in prose underneath.
So, yeah, in number 9, in that opening sentence for that paragraph underneath, I think it says the above question was
Only to
only
respondents.
presented to the respondents who had answered that they owned or managed a restaurant
So the percentages in the table or is the percentage of total responses?
that answered the question that they owned a restaurant.
Okay.
In the previous, I think it was question number 7, perhaps, that asked. So depending on how you answered the previous question, if you answered that I own a business downtown versus I visit downtown, then it automatically populated you with the follow-up question, well, if you own a business downtown, do you have a parklet and do you want to keep it? And so I think the percentages that you're looking at, Commissioner, are the ones based on who answered they own an establishment downtown.
Okay, I wanted, because to me, there's like different numbers being represented in the table than in the explanation. Was it 0.46 like less than 1%, or is it 47?
Well, I just did the math,
4%.
and 0.46 is 3 of 633. So I
Okay.
think you're right. The percentages at
Okay.
the top are based off the total number.
Total number, and then what's below is the total, is out of the number of business
That's
owners.
correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Just like which one is, which, but okay, thank you. But, okay, Sergeant Drills, any questions at this point, Commissioner?
All right, y'all ready to move on to the ordinance?
Yeah, let's hit it.
Yeah, thanks for running us through the
Yeah.
data.
And I want to also commend staff for a really well-structured and thorough public engagement process. The way that the survey was laid out, and then some of the hand-to-hand engagement that y'all did, I'd love to see. Yeah, I think that's what we need. That's what we need. So great job, everyone.
Well, we appreciate the GOC brainstorming survey question ideas as well at the last meeting. So I think, a good survey needs good questions. So it was a good team effort. With that, let's dig into the ordinance. And we're going to kick it to staff throughout the ordinance as we go through the gray shaded areas. Based on the survey, I think we should stop at the permit fee section as well, just to make sure we're all on the same page. One thing, if we're able to get through this tonight, then we can try to get into the next agenda cycle potentially. But I just want to make sure we have enough time to make all the decisions that y'all need to make tonight. So with that, are you ready to move forward? Okay. Gabby, you want to kick us off?
Sure. And if I may too, Manager Edwards, one section right on the front page that may answer Commissioner Parker's earlier question about limiting where the bike lane parklets could go. That eligibility, letters A and B. So for example, roads owned or maintained by GDOT, that would eliminate Broad Street. And then letter B, roads with a speed limit in excess of 25 miles per hour, that would limit Doherty Street right away as drafted. And you can certainly talk about, and we can research further amendments to that, but I just wanted to point that out.
So is staff recommending that's where we would put in if there are bike lanes present, and to limit that as well?
Yeah, I think if we're looking at limiting more streets, that would go in the eligibility section right away, I think, because I wouldn't want someone to get further into the ordinance thinking they're eligible only to find out later on that, whoops, there's that one surprise.
So what we'll do, Chair Parker, is once we get to the bike lane allowances section, TPW talks about the changes they've made, then we can have that discussion so we all can decide kind of what we're doing there.
Sounds fantastic.
But going further into the ordinance, we sort of went through this section by section at the last meeting. I don't necessarily want to do that. I want to stay with what we've changed so far, but stop me if you have any questions. So we've talked about page 1. There were really no changes to page 2 in terms of the permit or application. When we get to page 3 and the permit fees, these were not modified based on the survey results. We kept that up for discussion and debate for the GOC. These same rates were what we had last time, perhaps with the exception, although I think we indicated it last time, letter E, that any expense to modify public property for the use of a parklet would be at cost for that modification. But again, this would be the section where if we wanted to change or look at changing those permit fees, where we would do that.
So we wanted to make sure one last time we know we're comfortable with these fees as they're laid out, or if you wanted to discuss changing them.
I wouldn't mind seeing, a slight discount, considering that these parklets are enabling the creation of additional. It's not buckets of revenue to the ADDA. But I feel like it's reasonable to have a slight discount.
Yeah, then what's the current discount based on what we would typically make with parking revenue? Do you remember that?
I think if I had to,
50? It's under, it's not under
So this is about a 30% discount.
yeah, I want to say,
Well, maybe that makes sense.
To the question of sort of like parking displacement, and this I imagine varies based upon parklet, but like a rough figure of how many people can fit in a parking space, like if, using it as a seating area.
a typical parking space on the street is going to be about a 7 by 22 roughly space. And I want to say when you account for fire chief's recommendation that the parklet be accessible, you have to maintain at least that 5 foot wide opening and then a 5 foot wide turn radius essentially to get somebody at a table. So I would say it's within reason to 10.
Okay, just to think about like the cost benefit analysis of how many people are coming downtown if you have a car parked there versus how many folks can actually enjoy that space, and as a place to recreate. But yeah, that was kind of beyond the current point. I was just a question off my head. So Commissioner Ling chimed in that a slight discount seems reasonable to her. Any other thoughts on discounted rates or rates in general for recouping less parking revenue? Commissioner Denson, did you have anything?
I could see a slight discount in place, but I do also think these rates that we have here are reasonable. So I could kind of go either way.
Okay. And strong feelings, Patrick?
I think that's reasonable.
So we're kind of in the middle of thinking these current rates are reasonable, wanting to have a.
My train of thought is, with the pocket program, these businesses should be generating more revenue inside and out.
Right, as opposed to previously where that now they're more able to utilize both indoor and outdoor spaces. As folks grow more comfortable with sitting indoors, so that they are likely to see an increase in revenue by taking part in this program, whereas before it was sort of replacing lost revenue. I would defer to staff. So if this is what you all think is reasonable to help, recoup those costs while also perhaps incentivizing participation to keep the downtown vibrant and other, such benefits, then I'm cool with it. Yeah. All right, let's move on. Yes, we have.
Okay, the next change that we are looking at is on page 4 under the letter D, Americans with Disabilities Act. And I will say, Transportation Public Works, did y'all contribute to some of these? Yeah. I'll sort of let y'all go over that if you'd like to.
Here.
So in our review of some of the other ordinances, there was a really helpful guide from the city of Santa Monica that actually had a lot of details such as the size of the gaps and the elevation. And we felt like in order to maintain that ADA access, keep preventing too big of a gap. So what we go into here is the half-inch gap between the curb and the decking. And then ensuring that the finished surface of the deck must be within a quarter inch of the elevation of the curb. And if the gaps are larger, you can do a threshold spacer, which is just basically a ramp. The other part of this is that if there is a constructed platform built for the parklet, we want to ensure that the stormwater flow is not impeded. So ensuring that the gutter area is clear by 6 inches minimum width and height. That'll allow for the stormwater to kind of flow through there. So those are just some of the details. And I don't know if it's easier to package that as a separate reference guide that we could potentially give as a graphic kind of pairing to this. And you say, you know, these are the criteria to follow this guide. That may be an easier way to just do changes as we find instances of that.
One question that has come up for us before as we've discussed ADA accommodations is that when I speak with folks in the disability advocacy space, sometimes ADA compliance is not always like the highest standard in terms of actual needs. It's sort of, in some folks' view, sort of like the minimum that you can do. And I wondered if we had engaged anyone that uses an assistive mobility device around if this is adequate for what their needs might be.
Yeah, that's a great point. We did not, we focused on just looking at the guidelines. That
Sure, yeah.
But I think that would be a good idea because, I mean, even if you're building a platform on pavement, there's also slope to the pavement. So, you know, is it better to have a flat platform that sits on pavement? Could still be too steep. Building out a level platform of some sort. Or how many of these are going to just be astroturf on the asphalt versus, you know, actually having a platform?
Any thoughts on that from other commissioners? Because if it's not shared, then we can prioritize some other concerns that are more salient to you all. Well, I think that one's pretty important. But.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I have those concerns, but I feel like these seem reasonable and they are part of standards, right? They are standing standards. But it might be good to reach out to, you know, some disability advocacy groups and just ask them if this seems reasonable to them.
I wouldn't mind doing so.
They foresee any problems with this because the pavement is sloped. So there could be some weird issues with that. Thankfully, Clinton Street's getting resurfaced, so potholes and stuff should go away.
Well, we're happy to, you know, if we're going to keep this on the agenda for the GOC for another month, we're happy to reach out in between meetings and have that conversation.
Sure.
And follow up with y'all.
Yeah, just to see if there are any major concerns.
I just recall it brings back to, sorry, Commissioner Denson, did you have something?
Yeah, I guess if I just ask if Commissioners Parker or Link could expound a little bit on like what improvements over this y'all would, or where the issue is that y'all see. Because I guess I look at this. This is very similar to what we already have for sidewalks and such.
Sure. So as someone that doesn't use an assistive mobility device, it's hard for me to understand. That's why I feel like engaging someone that has that perspective would be important, as you know, folks that don't encounter that difficulty in our own lives mainly. And this concern mostly arises out of the issues that we saw, I think it was last year, with a playground that was built where technically it was ADA compliant, but that was sort of a lower threshold standard than what one constituent's son would have needed in order to actually access the play space. So it's like, well, technically it's compliant, but it wasn't actually meeting the needs of people that would be attempting to take advantage of it. So that's what sort of developed my awareness of like, okay, maybe we need to just like check in with the folks in that community to ensure that this actually meets needs and doesn't simply, you know, meet sort of across the board standard. If that makes sense. Commissioner, do you have anything to add?
That's it.
Okay.
I did have, and I'm sorry, this is really loud. I'm not sure if y'all can turn it down in the room or something. But I did have one question about this, which was just when it comes to any businesses wanting to do this on Hancock, are we going to require the curb cut because of the way the bike lanes are configured?
So a solution that we can talk about. Get to that
In that section.
section.
It's coming up.
All right.
All
Rob.
right.
Yeah, so
Okay, so the next section as well, when we talk about barriers, I'm gonna defer to TPW on that as well, but you had asked for a little bit more clarification and specification regarding the actual barriers that would protect the perimeter of the parklets, and so I'll let you on.
Is it easier if I stand up or stay? Okay.
or you can come sit here. If you want to sit here, please.
So this is another one where we pulled some extra information from the Santa Monica guidelines. The gap is just to ensure that they're kind of linked together and you have proper spacing, both to ensure people aren't coming out into traffic, as well as just ensuring that they're doing the right number of barriers. We don't want them to be easily moved, altered, or stolen. They also need to be freestanding, stable, and sturdy enough to not fall over or be pushed over. And they also can't be anchored in the right of way. And so that makes it a little tricky. I think that kind of limits down the type of barriers that you could see. One that they showed as an opportunity is the water-filled jersey barriers. Those can usually link together, and they fall within the criteria of the withstanding the 250 pounds of force in all directions. I'm not sure. This was kind of pulled from their ordinance. I don't know how they test that, which would maybe be one of my concerns is, for the attorney's office is, if we're providing this kind of list of requirements, how are we ensuring that, they're being met? And then the last section here, I'll go and talk about reflective bans or other modifications approved by Transportation Public Works as needed. So that just kind of ensures that we get a chance to kind of lay eyes on them. Traffic engineering, they're always up to date with the most recent standards and stuff. One of the changes we made was that it called for, I think, white reflective barriers. The reflective tape color is very dependent on where the barrier is located. So you might be able to frame it up easier than I could, but if it's directly adjacent to the left side of travel lane, then yellow reflective bands must be used. So where a yellow center line would exist, that's where you would have yellow reflective bands. I don't know if we have a situation like that in downtown because the parking is usually on both sides. There's two ways. I don't think we have any, there's a couple of one-way streets. I'm not sure if they would be eligible for parking. So we want to ensure that's in there just in case it does.
One thought that came to mind with regards to how do we know something can withstand 250 pounds of force? Are there certain materials we could sort of designate that we know to be sturdy enough? So you mentioned the jersey barrels, for example. So we know that this will function in a certain way based on our understanding of just its sturdiness. I don't know if that'd be possible, but I wanted to throw it out there as an idea.
Yeah, I have the same kind of a follow-up question. So when I read this, so the barriers, to create these barriers to mark the parkway as well. So the 250 pounds, are we thinking like a car bumping into it or a drunk person falling over?
No, that's
So 240.
I picture another UGA championship situation.
So we talked about this in a previous meeting. Tim, I know you landed on 250. Y'all did research, Daniel, and this was what we saw in some of the other policies from across the country as a general kind of mark, but there was no firm, this is why 250. If it's 250, we know people will be safe. But what we're trying to do is create safety between traffic and folks sitting out there eating their dinner or their lunch. So it would limit, the potential for, a grave situation to happen. It doesn't mean it couldn't happen, but it was kind of a benchmark we saw in other policies.
It's a benchmark we saw. Yeah, go ahead.
That way in on this.
Yes, please.
The Waterfield Jersey barriers are acceptable in a work zone where you have staff working or personnel working out in the streets. So they are designed to protect those people from a collision type situation. Also, one of our manuals does give us some guidance as to the amount of force something can take. And trying to think which one it is, but can't come up with it right off the top of my head. But there are other things that are guaranteed. And if you've been out on some of the interstates, you've seen some of the end sections of guardrail that are designed to withstand a collision. Those things do have guaranteed levels of force reduction. However, they are extremely expensive, and we felt like they would be cost prohibitive to a program such as this. And the Waterfield barriers, they do. We would be comfortable with our workforce working within a segment of those.
So what if, someone were to use something like a large planter or, filled with concrete or rocks at the bottom, like the grid, outside the grid, they have those big giant metal planters.
Those would be acceptable, and as well, and honestly, Commissioner Link, they wouldn't have to be filled with concrete. We'd rather they be filled with soil or something.
Dirt.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because I'm trying to wrap my head around this no larger than 4-inch gap between barriers. At first I was picturing fencing, but you're talking about big, solid, car-proof barriers. I was initially picturing, ropes between stanchions or something, but we're talking solid barriers.
So there are some options within the guidelines that show using our typical barricades, that the steel,
The bike rack.
yeah, the bike rack looking ones, and those link together. And what they do in that situation is they have a flat, basically there's the vertical wall and then there's the horizontal element, and then they put the heavier planters over those horizontal bracings. So that prevents anyone from being able to move or adjust it by having these heavy planters kind of anchoring it in. And so in that case, the 4-inch would apply between the actual barricades, not necessarily the planters.
Okay.
So I show you an image. I don't know how much we want to pull from the, it's the tactical parklet design guide. And also, since then, I have learned that the city of Atlanta is working on one as well. So I have not gotten a chance to take a look at it yet.
But we can compile information, share with y'all between meetings.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can get some more info on that. But ultimately, that's why we didn't want to necessarily say, this is the construction barrier you need to use, because we wanted people to have the flexibility to make it aesthetically nice and, but still accomplish the same goals.
Okay. Yeah, I would like to see people be able to get creative.
These barriers also, they're not, they wouldn't be able to stop a car at speed who's going into the parklet. I think they're meant to reduce the amount of impact that would happen, or in some cases, even if someone's backing up to, parallel park and they drive too far back, they're going to notice if they hit something with that resistance versus, a small railing that might actually pin someone underneath it. And so it's kind of just a way to give it a little bit of heft so that, those in their vehicles can still detect when there's something nearby.
It's so the portable safety barriers, the metal ones we see sometimes downtown, would Will those work at the 250 threshold?
What do you see it like with festivals?
Yeah.
It with the added weight on the legs.
Okay.
Yes. But standalone, those we've seen people can move those pretty easily
Yeah.
if they want to get out of their beer garden during twilight or something. People just move them. So.
All right, any other questions on this before we move forward? We're getting close to that hour mark, so I want to make sure we.
I feel like this next section is easy, personally, but yeah, let's move on to governance again.
nearby and could utilize, so this wouldn't necessarily be needed in that spot. But yeah, this is just a way that, and they actually sell an entire parklet system that's modular. It's a lot more expensive. These are about $6,000, $6,500 per set. So if we wanted to have these on hand, we would request, because they're being shipped from Spain. So we would want to order them at once so that we could get a shipping container full of stuff. They sell other products besides this. And then we would also want, because shipping would be just astronomical.
Well, this would be a cost we'd ask the parklet owner to bear.
Yeah, so what we'd want to do is get the total cost, find out the lifespan, divide it down so that the fee that gets tagged on the front end over time would pay to replace this if it is. So if they had it for 10 years, I mean, I don't know the lifespan is, but 10 years, then that fee would cover the cost of replacing.
So right now, just the national. But future, okay. And I haven't been to the national. I haven't been out there in a minute. You said there's a driveway next door to it. So an ADA person would go to the side and then cross the bike lane to enter into the parklet.
So basically, where Sine, with the front of Sine is, that has an old driveway, like a ramp that goes down, and through the previous method of getting that parklet approved, the National actually has the two spaces, one in front of Sine and one in front of the National instead of both spaces in front of the National. I don't know the full story there, but in that particular case, because they have that space right in front of Sine, that would count as ADA access.
So they wouldn't have to go through.
But one thing we did talk about was signage. And so I know TPW has an estimate for how much the signs would cost for an applicant in that situation. So we talked about a sign on each side potentially, or do y'all want to share kind of some of your cost estimates?
Sure, the signage, the nicest sign that we would want would be $100 approximately. And then the post would be approximately $65 a piece. That would include the mounting hardware for both putting the post and the sign together, as well as something to mount those on the sidewalk, asphalt in this case. So about $165 per assembly.
It'd be 6,000.
That would be in addition to the ramp if that was required, because the signs would still be needed for that ramp system. But in the current situation, even though they wouldn't be getting the ramp system, we still do want to limit the number of crossing locations and confine it to an area.
Doesn't the ADA access portion talk about like permanent curb? So I wonder if that cost would be cheaper to just create an actual permanent curb ramp instead of that, to like make that way.
Commissioner, you're correct. I mean, this is an alternative to actually physically improving the roadway. But again, that we've got it in the ordinance where to alter the roadway to start is at cost. And then if a year later they decide they don't want a parklet, they endure the cost to put it back as well. So it could be cheaper in some instances. It just depends on where they are and how much work they have to do.
So there are options.
I just really quick, I'm just make sure I understand this. So would this work, like, for instance, outside of South Kitchen Bar? So I know they're one that doesn't have a curb cut out. Like, I always was wondering if this would be too tall, like if it would create an added problem.
I was wondering that too.
Okay.
I haven't been, I mean, the height of curbs are variable in different locations. And so I think where this comes into play is that is enough clearance to make sure that you are definitely above the curb. And then their attached ramp that goes from the top would bridge down at an acceptable slope.
Got it.
So, because the ramp that goes down to the curb, I believe, is 2 feet minimum, at least the length of it. So it's not meant to be a flush.
Thank you.
So we're sitting at 6:30, so we got 30 minutes left. Just wanted to bring that up for everyone.
Okay.
Do we want to move to the next section? And I know Crystal's here, so I want to make sure we have some time to talk about.
Do we want to halt our discussion of parklets here and return to the rest, maybe with fresh eyes next time, and maybe also incorporating some of the feedback and answers that you all, that we all need to work on so that we can ensure crystal adequate time? Does that sound good to everyone?
Yeah, that sounds good. And then maybe when we come back, we can get some of the feedback from the ADA community before we get on to that final applicant session.
So in terms of parklets, just can you scroll down, Cynthia, to the last section that was gray shaded? Just wanted to bring y'all's attention to, so we've got some signs here, and if you keep, in between meetings, if you could take a look at this, because this is some changes that we've made in terms of how we might mark and show how someone would have to move from the restaurant to the parklet. So we have adjusted the ordinance to take away the green paint, and the police department has helped brainstorm an alternative solution. So I know we're not going to get into the details today, but since the police department's here, I wanted to make sure y'all knew that they, come up with an alternative based on the feedback we heard from y'all, and it's outlined here, and we're happy to discuss that at the next meeting. I just wanted to draw your attention to it before we move on. All right. With that, we're going to transition. Staff, thanks everybody for coming, for being a part of this.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
We'll switch to animal services.
It's all good.
Okay, so that's going to be talking about this type.
The national.
Yeah.
This one, right?
Okay.
That's. But I can hold it now.
But that goal, it's not elevated, it's on the sidewalk, right?
That's right, there's like it just means that they can access the park without having to have like a platform or something for it to be, for them to come in the park.
You're still in the house.
I think so because of the bike lanes. Oh, right, of course.
Oh, gosh. Okay. Thank you.
Too. That's neat.
Homeowner association, 7.
Thank you.
It's a quorum. It's a quorum, 3 of us,
Yes.
okay, including if Jen's beaming in.
Screen.
All right, let's jump in. Crystal is here, and we sent y'all in advance the pages. Y'all were very efficient last time, and so we think we'll be able to get through this pretty quickly. But we wanted to keep moving through the ordinance to break it up into chunks. Chair Parker, are you ready for us to jump in?
Sure, let's hit it.
All right, Crystal.
All right, so again, I'm going to go through each section just very briefly, and then if there's any specific definitions, I'll try to touch on those, and then feel free to stop me if there's any questions, concerns, any language that you guys thought that you wanted to change. So 4116 is enforcement. Really, this is just updates for general department updates. There's really nothing more than just the departmental stuff that needed to be fixed in this section. Did anyone have any specific questions or concerns?
Looks good.
Okay, so I'm sorry, is this the right? Is this the one we were looking at last? This isn't the grayscale, is it?
I think so. You have something different?
It does look.
It just looks
This
so
is
odd.
showing.
It's showing the
markups.
red.
I think you need to click on.
Yeah, and I apologize.
Oh, the version without, I mean, is it?
Yeah, that's what we were looking at last time.
Okay.
If you go to view,
Word just brought up the red.
yeah,
Yeah.
Markup.
I think it's easier if it's gray shaded. I mean, some might find it
review,
helpful
I'm
to
sorry.
see the before and
Thank you,
after, but I
Cynthia.
kind of think
Yeah,
it's a little confusing.
remove tracking.
yes,
There
thank
we
you.
go.
Okay,
Hey,
okay. So I apologize. Can you go back to 15? I think, yes, okay. So I was like, this is not what my notes said. Okay. So again, so I apologize to digress. So this just offered the ability to, for penalties, the ability to, if we had multiple violations, to count it as a single offense. So it gives Sherry some more wiggle room in court. Did anyone have any questions about this?
I actually had a question on the sliver of text right before that, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
So, so the commission can establish reasonable fees from time to time or at any time. Is that not something we need to do as part of this process, since I don't know when this ordinance is gonna come back to us, or is that a separate like fee schedule that we can work on
Yes,
separately?
so we've done, so basically, before the fees were set in the ordinance, we've taken it out and we've done a fee schedule.
Amazing.
So we put that in there because if we have to change a fee, I don't know, mid-year.
It'll happen in terms of in the
Yes.
budget every year that
Yeah.
you adopt.
Okay.
You'll see adjusted fees where that's where we could change it.
Yeah, or if
Every fee.
something, like if we ended up adding something mid-year, with, outside of that budgetary time, this gives us the ability to do that.
Great, thank you. We can move on.
Okay, so penalties were good. Enforcement, the same thing, very minor updates, just for the department. I'm sorry, go ahead.
The $300 fee, is that, can you scroll back up just a little bit more? Violating section 4.1. It's no worries.
So before there used to be not the ability to, and Sherry, correct me if I misspoke, but there was only, you had to do, like, if you had 5 dogs, but they were really, people were really, trying to work on the issue, we had to charge each individual. This is giving us the ability to charge as one.
It's for menacing, if that helps answer your question.
Yeah.
So the reality is that in the example of 5 dogs, if I had that case, I'd either have to dismiss charges that I otherwise thought were valid, or I'd have to charge someone $1,500, which I didn't want to do. So this way we can craft that into a more appropriate penalty when there's a case that just involves multiple dogs without having to just dismiss valid charges, because we want to have a record for those dogs that they did in fact menace someone in the past. The $300 was set previously, so that was not something that and it's the only mandatory minimum in the animal ordinances, or actually most of the ordinances that I can think of.
I'm not gonna follow through on that one, but I'm just saying, like, if you have multiple violations, maybe you shouldn't have a pet,
It's also an argument.
Is that addressed elsewhere in the ordinance?
The
multiple violations might perhaps being grounds for removal, as opposed to repeated fines?
Yeah.
Did we end up?
So I don't think that it's in there.
No, I think we ended up not.
Yeah, I think the problem is that it's really hard to legislate for every circumstance.
Yeah.
And the problem is that we see dogs that pack up, who are otherwise quite reasonably good dogs, and even have very, very good, and I realize that good is like, it's loaded term, but I mean, owners were trying to do their best with their animals, but that pack up and do something horrible and unexpected. And so we didn't necessarily want to create situations where, congrats, your dogs did that as a one-time thing and now you lose them. And because of people who are lower income, or quite frankly, higher income, having to suddenly pay $900 or something like that because your 3 dogs got to an incident can be really tough.
Sure. So I guess what I was touching on, I agree, absolutely. But like repeated incidents, so not multiple dogs in one incident, but like your 3 dogs, this is the 4th time they've gotten out and hurt someone. What happens in that circumstance? Because it does seem like in that, circumstance of like those dogs being together, etc., is creating a problem for the dogs themselves, where they're then encouraged to go out and do craziness.
Absolutely. So in those kinds of situations, honestly, it doesn't even take a 3rd or 4th. We're looking at a 2nd time where there was menacing. We're having some really significant conversations with the owners, and I can ask the judge to order them to surrender. A lot of times we're looking at an unsupervised probation where the condition is they do not get any more animals or they surrender animals. So we're absolutely attuned to those, and we can always do more than this minimum. It's just this is the floor.
Got it. Any other questions at this time? Commissioner Denson? Great. Oh, just kidding.
Can you talk to us? Yes.
So enforcement, besides those general department updates, this also may be a area where when you guys read may have questions, because this did cover warrants and the ability of of entry, inspection and search warrants. Right now, we don't really have the ability, or we do, but it's a really long, painful ability, and by the time we are able to do that, it's really kind of a moot point. So this gives us the ability to actually get some of those warrants and when we would be using those. Did anyone have any specific questions in this area?
I think so.
Section 4117, impoundment of animals, includes general language and department updates. One of the big things that you'll notice in the last is dealing with livestock, and that's stray and running at large. This gives us the ability to actually impound livestock. We do it now, but this will give us the ability to do it more so within the ordinance. So, any questions on this section?
This is something that does come up from time to time.
Yeah, we just got rid of a pig, so. And we had 2 goats that somebody picked up, so it definitely happens. Disposition of impounded animals. So this is essentially how we're getting our animals out. So again, general department language updates the ways we can contact owners. So by phone, mail, I believe personal contact is in there. So that if we got an animal with a chip or some kind of identification, it goes over those ways to get back in touch with the owner. Also puts a timeline on animals that have to go for alteration. And so by that, if you come in and do a reclaim and you've said, yes, I want my dog to get altered, or it has to be altered, once we do that altercation, that altercation for the animal, then they only have a certain time period to pick it up. So that way it can't indefinitely stay at animal services once it's altered. And then also puts a timeline on issues that need to be corrected by the owner. So if they pick an animal up or if they come to reclaim an animal, but we won't let it go home because it needs a dog house, or their place where they were keeping it wasn't safe, they could still do the reclaim while they're fixing those problems, but it gives them a time frame to do that. Did anybody have any questions on that?
Mm-hmm.
Um, 19, the reclaim of impounded animals. So again, general department language updates. Also talks about the proof of ownership and caretaking status, and then also covers some of those dates that are important to us, those 5 dates, and then also just the department language. Did anyone have any questions on that?
Notification of if my dog got loose and I'm on vacation. So how are we notifying? And so you pick up my dog and you count 5 days and then it's considered abandoned. But what if I'm in Bahamas or something?
Have you had that happen before?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's unfortunate, but yeah. So hopefully the dog will have a microchip. And hopefully on that microchip, you have a second person that we can contact. So, if a dog comes in with nothing on it, we put it on the website. Everybody that calls in, we tell them, go on the website, also come in and physically look, because a brown dog, to me, you may be describing it as brindle or tan. So on the website, physically come in and look. If it's microchipped, then we call the microchip company. And I will tell you, I would say 75 to 80%, that gets us nowhere. Then we have to call the place that implanted the microchip, because generally that first batch of information is not correct. So then they give us what they can give us. Sometimes they have information, sometimes they don't. Sometimes that information is 5 years old. So we do everything we can. If it's in Athens-Clarke County that we have an address for, we'll even try to send an officer out to the house to see and to leave a notice. I don't think that's mandatory. That's just something that we try to do above and beyond because we realize that things happen. So to answer your question, if you're on the Bahamas and you don't have a chip on your dog, you get 5 days.
Okay.
Hopefully you have a good dog sitter.
Everyone watching at home.
Update your microchip.
Before you go to the
No.
microchip, you never know.
Yes, update your microchips because you just never know. You know, and that goes to people that like, you know, you get sick and the ambulance comes and lets your dog out. You just never know. So, but yes, so we do, I think we have a good process for how we get animals back, but it absolutely happens to where, you know, people come on day 6 or 7 and then we are hoping that we can adopt their animal back versus reclaim it. Because at that point it's in the ordinance. I can't.
To the extent it's helpful, the surrounding counties only have a 3-day straight hold.
Yeah.
So we're actually one of the longest.
Yeah, ahead of the
Yeah.
game. What's up?
Yep.
All right, let's keep moving if that's cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So the surrender language, a lot of first we changed it to it was gift. Somebody could gift their animal. It is a gift, but it's really surrendering. So we've changed that. So it talks about surrendering an animal now, not giving a gift. And then it updates the ability for only Athens-Clarke County residents to be able to surrender animals because obviously our tax dollars, we want to go back to Athens-Clarke County.
And is residency determined by the presentation of some form of identification?
Some form of identification. Yeah. And we're really, because there's a lot of college students, so we will take leases, a phone bill, just something that has a current Athens-Clarke County address. With the exception that if you are out of the area, but you found an animal in Athens-Clarke County, we will still take that animal because we want to be able to reunite. And if you live 2 counties over, nobody from here is going to be looking there for their animals. So we take in Athens-Clarke County animals as well. Okay. So, because we have lots of people that drive through. I'm trying to. And again, this goes over the reclaim, the proof of reclaim, and then also that how much time you have to do that reclaim. Once it's been sexually sterilized. Did anyone have any questions on any of that?
Good to me.
Can I just, I want to highlight this just because it is going to be a big change. With this one and the one before, like the section C, what it's saying is that if we take your animals because of poor conditions and you don't rectify those conditions within, I think with the 10 days, correct me if I'm wrong,
yeah,
then you would still lose your animal, even though you're attempting to reclaim. And we see that from both sides because in one situation we had, someone got really upset because they paid a lot of money to reclaim their animals and then we ended up seizing them 3 days later. And they said, why did you let them come back if the conditions were so bad? And they are ASPCA commercial bad. But we couldn't hold the animals under the ordinance until they fixed them. So that's the goal of this. But we recognize it, it could create some unfortunate circumstances where folks want to reclaim, but they're just not able or willing to fix the conditions within that period of time. And then that comes to that question I think earlier of, well, do you need to have animals?
Yeah.
But I just wanted to highlight that because that is a big change.
Yes, thank you, Sherry. Because that one is going to be, I'm sure that we will have cases come up where somebody wants to, and for whatever reason, they're not willing to make the changes necessary, or they just can't, for landlord issues or, housing issues, financial issues, whatever the case may be. So did that bring up any additional questions? Yeah. Adoption of animals, any animal, really it's just department changes. And then, paying the required fee. Again, we took the fee out of this section and it's going to be on that fee schedule. This does give us the ability to do, adoption specials during events and, special things like that. animals that have been in the shelter longer, they get a reduced price. You know, we can make that differentiation between the cute little puppy that everybody wants and the, you know, 100-pound pit that, you know, a lot of people still want, but ends up being there longer. So, so it's really straightforward. It's just really department stuff and then taking the fees out.
Which is something we heard as we engage with stakeholders.
Yes.
That flexibility would be appreciated and something we see at other shelters as well.
Yeah, I think that's really the sheltered standard. So. And then, I'm sorry, the escape, injury and theft is really that, really just department updates, but really just saying that we're going to, as animal services employees, that we are going to try to prevent the escape, injury, or theft of any animal. Escape, unfortunately, does happen every once in a while with working with animals, but, you know, just that we're going to help prevent that. And that if it does occur, we're not really, we're not held responsible for it. I think that's kind of, I didn't really prepare for quarantine because I think that's going to be, I'm thinking that's going to be a bigger one.
Sure, sure. If this feels like a good place to address any lingering questions from anyone, or sort of just get our ducks in a row for our next meeting, that seems good. Any questions or thoughts at this time from commissioners?
Yes.
Okay.
Did I read that cats have to be indoors?
Yes.
Technically, they're not allowed. It's supposed to be leaving your property.
Did they kill birds and stuff, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
that's
yeah,
a,
good luck keeping it.
yeah.
We got
Yeah.
trying best.
Technically, they have the same leash law. So you could have a cat like on a halter and a leash outside, but it's not, there shouldn't be an indoor-outdoor cat, loose outdoor.
What if you live like way out in the country, you have 27 acres of land and okay.
I don't know where that's at in Athens-Clarke County, but if you happen to have 27 acres land, it still has to live indoors.
Okay. The last, on section 4132 about the sale of pets at retail. No, not retail, but you know how like you go in the Walmart shopping center, you see outdoor sales prohibition. When you go to like Walmart, you see mom and pop selling puppies or something. So that's for
so
currently, or?
we haven't touched on that, but yes, that is essentially specifically for those instances, or like, and correct me if I'm like the J&J flea market. You know,
Except it's not.
it's not in this county,
yes,
but yeah,
exactly.
like if there was a pop-up flea market, there would be prohibitions from selling those animals there, because generally speaking, they're not selling them with proper vetting and medications.
It doesn't
and health
apply to
certificates.
chickens and duckies, though, does it?
What's the technical term?
Yeah.
People are
Dog,
selling
cat, domestic rabbit.
Yeah.
chickies.
I think we left it at the dog, cat, domestic rabbit, specifically for like Tractor Supply. I know sells chicks.
Yeah.
So we specifically left it
You
at
can
dog,
buy
cat,
chicks
domestic
too,
rabbit.
right?
Yeah. You can, it's
You
crazy.
can get your box.
Yeah.
And part of the reason we wanted to do this is in Georgia, it's illegal to have more than 1 litter per year but that's a law, that's a state regulation of the GDA. And candidly, it's hard to enforce. And so this gives us the ability to try to assist the GDA and ourselves to try to combat backyard breeding. Because, you know, for every like person out there who is a genuine, just like nice person who just had an oops litter and is trying to do the responsible thing to find homes, we also have a lot of people who do this as a business with animals who are not in good condition, and do a lot of really reprehensible things. So that's what we're trying to address.
Yeah.
Does any of our surrounding neighbors have this prohibition? Like
I
open
don't
up?
believe so.
Madison.
No, certainly not. But no, not Madison County either.
I do think we found some when we looked broader, but not just, yeah.
Okay.
There were some languages when we looked much broader, but not just our surrounding neighbors. And I have not forgotten about the bird sanctuary issue. It's just something we haven't had a chance to discuss. So at some point, we'll bring that back to you.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I know Patrick's gotta leave, so I will follow up with you all regarding next month's agenda, confirming quorum, et cetera, via email, also to loop in Commissioner Handy, who couldn't be here. So with that, I would, accept a motion to adjourn. So move.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Thank you so much, Crystal.
Welcome.
That is
Thank
all.
you, guys.
One thing I might say, I mean, really, so it feels like we're